Oh, shit. Oh, come here.
Hey, what is going on? I'm hearing all this noise and now you're laying out here on the couch and...
Oh, I made a big mistake.
What do you mean you made a big mistake? Doing what?
Mr. Saltwater Tank said, tip the bucket and let them swim out, but my 5-gallon bucket wouldn't fit in the top of the aquarium. So I was moving them from a 5-gallon bucket into a 1-gallon bucket. I didn't want to do any pouring, so I tilted the bucket gently to make him swim into a smaller bucket, but then he just swam out and onto the floor.
Oh my goodness.
Along with some water, which is no big deal.
So what did you do?
Picked him up and put him in the
What do you mean,
tank.
you just picked him up?
What was I gonna do? He was out of the water. I had to act fast. I thought I was doing it right.
What did Mr. Aquarium say?
His name is Mr. Saltwater Tank.
Been there, done that. While Jim is recovering from his dramatic fish on the floor event, I'm going to walk you through what to do while your fish are in quarantine. Before I talk about prophylactically treating your fish, let me be clear about this point. I'm not a fan of throwing every medication at a fish in hope of wiping out anything that it could possibly carry. For example, hitting it with external parasite medications, and then internal parasite medications, and then antifungals, antimicrobials, all the gamut, putting the fish through it and then saying, it's as clean as it could possibly be, now I'm going to go into my tank. Now, if you see a disease on the fish, certainly treat against it. But when I'm prophylactically treating my fish, I'm most concerned about ick and I'm most concerned about marine velvet, especially marine velvet. So for me, it's not worth the risk of having the fish bring marine velvet into my tank, so I prophylactically treat the fish against them. Once your fish are in your quarantine tank, the first thing to do is to decide if you're going to prophylactically treat your fish. What does that mean? That means treating them against a disease even though you may not see that disease. Now some of you may be thinking, well, that sounds crazy. If the fish doesn't appear to be sick, why would I treat them? There are a couple of reasons for it. One, there's documented cases of fish having a disease but not showing signs of the disease, but carrying the disease where they can pass them on to other fish. This is especially true with ick, also known as cryptocarins. So you look at the fish, it's eating, it appears healthy, but it actually has a disease and can carry the disease into your display tank. If you prophylactically treat them, then if it has a disease and you treat it properly, you're going to take care of that disease and wipe it out even though you may not see it. You also may want to prophylactically treat your fish because you want to be cautious. And if that's you, I totally understand. Having been through the marine velvet outbreak in one of my former displays and watching it wipe out nearly every fish in that tank, it was a miserable experience. I don't wish it on anyone. Learn from my mistakes and quarantine all your fish. Now, again, I'm not saying throw every medication at them, run them through the gauntlet, and then put them in your display tank. Treat against the diseases you're most concerned about, and then you continue to observe the animals. So, once you've made that decision, that's out of the way, then what do you do once your fish are in quarantine? Keep your quarantine tank's temperature between 79 to 81 degrees Fahrenheit. This will encourage parasitic diseases to move through their life cycle faster. If the fish are in hyposalinity, also known as low salinity saltwater, bring the salinity up to 1.025 specific gravity or 35 ppt over the course of 14 days. The easiest way to do this is with small water changes. Important: if you are treating your fish with copper, do not start copper until your salinity is 1.025 specific gravity or 35 ppt. I have always said that quarantining your fish is a contact activity. And I mean contact in the different senses of the word. First, you want to make eye contact with your fish because they're super cool. You just got in some new fish that you picked out, probably because you liked them and you're like, wow, that's a cool fish. You want to look them over. Are they swimming about acting like a fish should that's of that type? For example, these dart fish are hanging out around the top. I've got some firefish in here. They're hanging out around the PVC pieces. They come out and look around and then they go and hide. This is normal. The other piece of that contact is you want the fish to get used to you. When you first put them in the quarantine tank and you walk into the room, they're probably going to book it for shelter because they're not used to this big thing walking in the room. Well, over those 30 days that they're in quarantine, they're going to get to know you and your routine. And a big part of that routine is food. What are you going to feed your fish? You want them to start eating what you're going to feed them in quarantine. So step one of this is find out what the fish were eating before you got them. If you bought them from a local fish store, say, hey, what are you guys feeding? And then buy some of that food if you don't have it. If you bought it from online, same thing. Write to them and say, hey, What are you feeding the fish? Make sure you have some of that food that they're already used to eating. Then start to work in your food, whether it be a pelleted food or a freeze-dried or a frozen. Work that in with what they're already used to eating to get them over to your food. Now there's some give and take on feeding your fish while they're in quarantine. You want to feed them ideally twice a day to get them gaining weight and used to your food, but there's not a lot of good filtration in a quarantine tank, and that's by design. So there's not a lot of good filtration, but you're putting in a lot of food. Some of that food isn't going to get eaten. So we have all these nutrients going into a under-filtered tank. That means you got to be testing your tank's water. Again, more contact here. Watching those nutrient levels. If ammonia gets high, you certainly need to do a water change. Nitrite as well. Nitrate, look, fish have a pretty big tolerance for nitrate. As long as it's under 50, I'm okay with it. But one of the things I do when I'm in quarantine, I plan on doing water changes so I've got plenty of water on hand. Now, if you don't have a mixing station like I or Jimmy do, don't worry, that's okay. You can always get water from your local fish store, or yes, you can do a water change with detoxified tap water in a quarantine tank. You get out the chlorine or the chloramines out of that tap water, it's going to be perfectly okay to use it for your water change in a quarantine tank. So while your fish are in quarantine, you want to observe them, get them observing you, get them eating your food, prophylactically treat if you want to do it, feed them enough, you got to keep an eye on those water changes. Now, at this point you may be saying, that sounds like a lot of work. It's actually not. You get a sense of how much you should feed and you can keep things in balance, but don't take my word for it. I'm going to turn it over to Jimmy and we're going to see how he's doing with his quarantine experience.
That was actually pretty accurate to what really happened. I had just done a drip acclimation of my fish into this 5-gallon bucket, and I wanted to put them in here, and Mark said, you know, put the bucket down into the water and let them swim out. Well, the 5-gallon bucket wasn't going to fit into this little tank, so I was doing that kind of a motion, getting them into the smaller bucket that would fit. And of course, I was too excited and the fish got off the edge and ended up on the floor down where I was doing this. It could have been a disaster. I picked him up quickly, dropped him in there, and you can see he's doing fine. But it was definitely a scary moment. And then that leads me to some of the things that I've been learning. And this applies really to anything, not just your new aquarium. You know, when you have something new or you're learning something, it is really exciting. And sometimes that excitement makes you move a little too quickly. You just want to get on to the next thing. And it's not always a great idea. So my advice applies everywhere. Slow down. Make sure you have a plan, you follow through. There's always going to be unforeseen things, but try to eliminate just silly things like dumping a fish on the floor. That was unnecessary. I feel silly about it. But I do know when it comes to fish, these guys are alive and I don't want any disasters. So I'm going to slow down from here on out when it comes to anything that's alive, especially, or water that's going to end up on my floor. Some of that's happened with my mixing station. No disasters, but definitely a learning curve to all of this. There's so much to learn. And that brings me to one more point. You know, Mark had mentioned prophylactically treating fish for disease in quarantine before you put them in to your larger environment or your display tank. And I also spoke to Jordan at ORA about this when he was helping me pick out fish. And he said it's always a good idea to quarantine. But since my fish came from ORA and it's an aquaculture facility, they were all, you know, captive bred and they all came from their facility. He wasn't too concerned that that really happens too much. And because I don't have anything else in my aquarium, these are going to be the first residents, I'm electing not to do a copper treatment this time because I just don't think I want to treat them when they've been doing so great in here and they're not going in where they're going to affect anything else. So it's kind of like moving them from quarantine to a bigger quarantine when I put them in there, because they'll have some time before I start adding corals and other fish. So I'm electing not to do that. Now, as far as their quarantine's gone, it's been going great. I'm feeding them frozen food that I break off a little piece, drop it in a cup of the water I scoop out of here, mix it up, let it dissolve over some time, and then I pour it in, and they're eating great. But I have noticed a little bit of fish waste or some extra food they're not eating down in the bottom, and that brought my ammonia level up a little bit. Now, I quickly text Mark when I measured and it's up, and he's like, that's barely a measurable thing, but it is a little, so go ahead and do a water change. So I did a water change. I actually brought it down almost half and did a water change. And I've actually done a smaller one since, because I just have the idea of, if I can see garbage like food or fish waste on the bottom, I'm just gonna get some of it out of there, since I saw the ammonia spike just a little. It's been a learning process, and there's so much more to learn. And that's why I'm here and sharing it all with you. That brings me to saying thank you so much for watching. Continue to watch. There's so much more. Please like, subscribe on the SaltwaterAquarium.com YouTube channel. We appreciate that. And then leave a comment. Tell us what you think of this first group of episodes as I venture into the big tank. It's coming. It's around the corner. More to come. Thanks again. See you next week.